So we'll get started now. Welcome to On the Park Bench, a public square conversation brought to you by the Congress for the New Urbanism. On the Park Bench presents interactive conversations with thought leaders in new urbanism and allied fields related to the built environment. And today we have disaster recovery through placemaking with Elsie Clemons, Garland Woodsong, Ryan Smoller, and Steve Mouzon, and moderated by myself, Rob Steuteville. And you can join us for upcoming webinars. We have an authors forum with Michael Dennis coming up, The Venetian Facade, and that's Tuesday, November 12th at 12 noon. And then we have Walkability for Restorative Urbanism, Tuesday, November 26th, also at 12 noon. And you can go to cnu.org/resources/on-the-park-bench to find out more and to register. And I'm really looking forward to the panel today. We've got some really interesting stuff, people working on the ground, helping people who really need it, recovering from a disaster. And the panel includes Elsie Clemons, who founded Force of Nature Solutions. She is a certified floodplain manager who advises FEMA public assistance applicants on best practices to rebuild more resiliently after a federally declared disaster. Her in-depth knowledge of FEMA public assistance policy combined with placemaking strategies allows her clients to make the most out of their recovery funds to rebuild safer and better places to expand economic opportunities and future smart growth. Garland Woodsong is Executive Director of Place Initiative and an expert in place-based climate resilience. He spearheads efforts to develop low-carbon resilient communities through innovative planning methods. His background includes tactical urbanism, scenario planning, housing policy, and real estate development, all of which position him to address long-term urban planning and immediate disaster response needs. And Thrive Asheville Executive Director Ryan Smoller is a nationally recognized leader in innovative, sustainable, and equitable community development. Smoller has led the Placemaking U.S. Learning Network and directed Santa Ana, California Historic District, where he assisted local arts, culture, health, and small business projects. Through his national and local leadership, Smoller brings a robust toolkit to assist community-driven efforts. And Steve Mouzon is not with us yet. Hopefully he'll be joining, but he's an architect, urbanist, author, blogger, and photographer based in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And he was instrumental in the Mississippi Renewal Forum back in 2005 in response to Hurricane Katrina. He's an architect and urbanist. I'm Rob Steuteville, editor of CNU's Public Square, and welcome Elsie, Garland, and Ryan to On the Park Bench. And I really look forward to hearing about the recovery efforts following Hurricane Helene and the role that new urbanists can play in disaster response. First, there's going to be a presentation among the panelists and then a brief discussion and then Q&A from the audience. So we're going to at least have quite a bit of Q&A. So please ask the Q&A function. Use the Q&A function of Zoom to ask your questions as they occur to you. We'll get to those more or less in the order they're asked. Now I'm going to hand this over to Ryan to begin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Rob, for having me on the bench with you. So my name is Ryan Smolar, and I'm the Executive Director of Thrive Asheville and also the co-director of Placemaking US. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about disaster recovery through placemaking. Now, first, let's set the context. This is very much still a live disaster. And we should be deferential about this topic. While many communities in the area have moved into recovery mode, a lot are still in rescue, a lot are still mucking and gutting, and it's a very, very painful place where there's not just one recovery going on, but many, many layers and many different types of recovery happening simultaneously. But I want to focus in on a particular part of the recovery that I'm most knowledgeable about and have been observant of, and that's that social infrastructure is or social infrastructure is climate resilience. And this is well documented in the book by Eric Kleinenberg, Palaces for the People and Heat Wave. But we've seen this on the ground locally. The first places that I encountered were in West Asheville, where a lot of the um, community came together in organic ways, created these hubs, created signage boards. This gentleman even became a human ATM. So you could either go up and make a deposit, give him money, or you could make a withdrawal from him and get fresh baked bread, your laundry done, even join a creative project. So it was amazing to see those types of things organizing, or the farmers market still stand. Whereas some farmers markets had their permits pulled because they were on public space and all permits were at first removed. We also saw the popping up of wayfinding, not just to services, but to mental health messages and even political statements. And we saw public-private partnerships form in 5 minutes. This is a library that the community was able to commandeer because one of their community members was on the board of the public library. Another community center also got commandeered by the community because a church that met there had their pastor work for Parks and Rec. So people were able to parlay these relationships into these incredible partnerships that became human hubs. One thing that surprised me a lot was the lack of sort of a center in the center. This is our, central square downtown. This is the primary site. FEMA was set up on the civic lawn, and these were not really activated spaces. They were pretty empty for the whole beginning of the recovery. But downtown businesses really stepped up, and small businesses became a whole nother layer of support and community building. They gave out free food. They opened their doors for free board games, and really were an amazing piece of our resiliency. We can't thank the World Central Kitchen enough. These guys are placemakers. They even take the time to bedeck their A-frame with flowers. When you got your food next door, you went to the Funkatorium, and there was a daily funk show for about 4 hours. So they were really able to keep people together, connected, and enjoying. Unfortunately, as urbanists, we saw a lot of the energy of community gathering end up in shopping center suburban parking lots. So the farmers markets moved to Steinmart's, abandoned Steinmart, but they didn't really have that social infrastructure for people to enjoy. They didn't have the seating, the shade, and so it still needs some evolution. This guy was playing music in front of Whole Foods. I don't think he ever got to play a note because people just kept coming up to him and giving him money. And so this is kind of where we saw the most energy, especially in privileged neighborhoods. You had people barbecuing and people setting up music and seating. And since placemaking often gets pigeonholed as a urban phenomenon, it was great to note this site that LC took me to, where a Nanostead, which is a tiny house builder, actually created a resilience hub with food trucks, with free beverages, and with plenty of places to sit. I think a really important theme that's emerged in this is the importance of democracy in recovery and how place and being together plays a big part in that. I'm really lucky to be in a high positioned organization where we're on every list in town and we're getting invited into really well-meaning conversations about the recovery, but they're very cloistered. They're on Zooms, they're in conference hall rooms, and there is some great opportunities where people are coming together, but we definitely need more. Nothing could be said about how great and important unity events are. And this was probably the flagship moment for the recovery, where there was a candlelight vigil hosted by the city and county that really brought thousands of people back together and felt like that crystal moment where we mourned what had happened to us and where we were going to go from here. Our organization, Thrive, has been bringing in expert voices from other recoveries. As I've learned after knowing LC for a long time, you don't really understand this world until your town is hit by a disaster and you live through one, what it is. And you're now part of unfortunately a big community of people who are experiencing these tragedies more and more often. So we were lucky to have Dr. Ryan Reynolds from Gap Filler, who helped with the 10-year placemaking recovery of Christchurch, New Zealand, through temporary projects and civic imagination, who has just happened to be by town and spoke to our community. And what was also really important is that after he spoke, our community got to speak. And so they got to share what that meant for them and what they were experiencing. We got some great literature advice, this A Paradise Built in Hell, which is apparently a really great book for communities going through recovery. And I'd love to keep in touch. You can contact us about volunteering. We're marshaling in the support. There's a lot of help and energy coming towards us, but we really need to connect the outside help to the right people on the ground so that it's not overwhelming and that things can get connected. And we really appreciate being here in the discussion. Thanks so much.
Okay, and Ryan is joining us from Cortona, Italy. Did I pronounce that correctly? But
as far as I know, yeah.
But Steve is also out there, so that explains his difficulty in signing on. But hopefully he'll join us at some point. But now we're going to go to LC.
Hey, Ellen Clemons here. I can speak to some of what I wanted Steve to speak to. I got into disaster recovery in 2011 when I lived through the April 27th, 2011 Alabama tornadoes. That we had 1,000 people at the peak of the disaster. I am prone to cry because this experience up here in North Carolina has really brought up a lot of my own trauma from that experience. So just ignore me as I am prone to tear up and cry. There's been just waves of emotion because, as Ryan said, it is an active disaster. We're a month in, and the really difficult part is that the national media, and it feels like the nation gave us 6 days of conversation about what was happening here, and then it all moved on to what was happening in Florida with the next election, and that's what happened to Alabama in our 2011 tornadoes. We got a couple of days of media coverage, and then things moved on. And what I saw was our communities get left behind, especially the small towns. So it turns out that you can be a regular person one day and live through a disaster, and then at some point 4 or 5 weeks in, you think, is this just how the rest of my life looks? And for me, that's how the rest of my life looks. So I just started I started learning federal policy because I wanted to understand how to protect the places that I love. And then I was already learning about smart growth and new urbanism. And I went to my first CNU in 2012. And I met a merry band of fools like the new urbanists that were involved in Katrina recovery. And I really felt like that there was a real opportunity for place-based design and human-centric design, especially as a former school teacher, to take care of children and families and people in the immediate aftermath of disasters. New urbanists often talk about how it's not an appropriate time to go into a disaster until months or years later, and that's just not what I find to be true, because the reality is that the recovery starts immediately. In Western North Carolina, we have over 1,400 landslides that damaged a tremendous amount. And what 160 water and sewer systems results in is people have no water. I'm going to show you some pictures of face painting that I did, and there are families that didn't want to let their kids get their face painted because they don't have any water. And we're a month in, and this isn't isolated. And Ryan spoke about Asheville, and I'll be representing the over 30 communities that have very small populations or in very rural areas, very geographically isolated in the beautiful mountains of Western North Carolina. and are not getting the media play and coverage that Asheville regularly gets. And we see this with every disaster. For the tornadoes, it was Tuscaloosa got all of the attention. It was terrible what happened in Tuscaloosa, but we had every county was a federally declared disaster zone. It looks like we're going to be at about over $53 billion in damages. And this is what the remnants of people's lives look like. This is active. Again, there are sinkholes that are opening up just a block from us, where the sinkholes were very small when I got here a week ago, and they have doubled or tripled in size. This is the bridge area where there are some additional sinkholes opening up on the other side. This is the floodwaters. This is, again, you'll see maybe images of Asheville. It's very dominant in the media, but there are communities all through the mountains. They are still finding people because roads, informal settlement roads, are being put back in, and volunteers are getting in through there and still finding people that have made makeshift huts and hovels to live in. So if you are interested in volunteering, just know that this is going to be going on for a very long time, and that people are needed from the immediate deployment after a disaster, and will be needed for years. This is people affected by natural disasters face a lot of emotional and psychological impacts, as you can see from just listening to Ryan talk. Already got me crying. Individuals and communities, our trauma makes it very hard for us to focus on long-term recovery. And so I know a lot of new urbanists and other academics can have very academic conversations about forced relocation and climate migration, and those things are very ethereal, because what it looks like on the ground is that people's lives are destroyed, and the first thing that you want to do is fix it back, because it's where you live and it's where you love, and it's the things that we want to put back together. And what I think is really beautiful about tactical urbanism is, it is, if you didn't have a well-built place before the disaster, or if that well-built place was destroyed by the disaster, tactical urbanism is the opportunity to recreate those places instantaneously, and they pop up naturally and organically. And the reason that placemakers are so important to respond to the immediate aftermath of a disaster, just like Red Cross does, is Garland will be talking more about place initiative and about place-based recovery. We know this conversation around things like sprawl repair. For me, place-based recovery is about the recovery after a disaster. The places that popped up immediately in the aftermath of the disaster are much better equipped from social cohesion to move forward. You'll hear somebody sawing wood right now. There's a man over there with an axe. There's a lot of tactical things that have popped up. This is a coffee shop that was intended to open here in Swannanoa. It was intended, the gentleman had just rented the building and he had a lot of renovations to do, but he just opened the delivery door and set up an informal coffee shop where he is doing donation-based coffee. He has a Starlink, which has been a game changer for all of us, to be able to have Wi-Fi on site. And then next door, there is a clothing shop where people can come and get donated supplies. We do not need any clothing. So if your heart is pressed, please.
Okay, Elsie, you're cutting out a little bit. Elsie and Garland are on Starlink.
Hello? Can you hear me?
There you go, yes.
Okay, yeah, we're on Starlink. No, that we've still got no water, and electricity is low around here. So if you want to send something, what would be helpful is to send gift cards to Lowe's and Home Depot. We have a lot of building to do, and so that's what we need. This is some of the tactical playground pops up, and that's where the tactical neighborhood hubs that I've developed over the last 8 years are going to come into play. We deployed on this disaster with this concept that has been evolving largely with my conversations with Steve Mouzon about the immediate deployment of a tactical neighborhood hub that can be intentionally set up, because while these places pop up organically, new urbanists know where things should pop up and how they should be configured, and that's where the site planning and design can be intentionally done so that it has longer term effects. This is some face painting that was done We all know the value of social connections and social cohesion and the happiness of kids. I've highlighted the little girl in the middle because she was sitting in front of me and she had a little doll in her hand, stuffed animal that somebody had given her, and her friend was saying like, "Oh, are you going to take that home?" And she said, "I don't have a home anymore. Everything washed away." There are children here that have not only lost their homes and everything, they've lost family members, they've lost a mother, they've lost a father. So we set up face painting. We those are water jugs that you see there that I brought a projector, and we had a movie night where we made popcorn. We are partnered with Better Block. Better Block has a container that we're going to be deploying so that we can pull out a lot more, start to formalize some of these spaces. Swananoa doesn't have a formal downtown, so we're helping create that. And this is sort of the impetus of the tactical neighborhood hubs. We are just about to enter into the contract with the gentleman literally today on deploying the tactical neighborhood hub on the side of that where the informal playground popped up. And liability insurance obviously is a big part of what we do. So that is the quick and dirty of tactical neighborhood hubs and how we came to be and why I care and why I'm so appreciative that there are so many people that are on the call today that are interested in learning more about this, because it will take all of us to deploy in the immediate aftermath of these types of disasters that are happening on the order of magnitude of one every week. So if you don't know of a disaster, don't worry, there is one coming to a town near you very soon.
Okay. Thank you, Elsie. Garland?
Before we move on, Elsie, do you want to tell people about the mermaids?
Okay, well, I've already cried a lot, so I'm sure a few more tears won't matter. There's something that you're gonna, if you ever came to the North Carolina mountains or on your future, you may see things like the mermaids of the mountains popping up. And what that is there was a little girl just a few days ago in one of the resource hubs getting some supplies, and she told the woman that was there about her mom, who was a mermaid. And the woman asked her, "What do you mean she's a mermaid?" And she said, "Well, when the waters came in, my mom is a really good swimmer, and so she helped me get on the roof of the house. And she told me that she loved me very much, and then she swam away, and her dad told her that she had become a mermaid and that she lives in the mountains now." And so that's something that people are starting to pop up now, is for the people that were swept away, because this came at night while people were sleeping in places that don't flood on the side of mountains. So if you ever come to visit and you see the mermaids of the mountains, you'll know where it originated. Thanks, Garland, for having me squall a lot on that one.
My pleasure. Yeah, but that's the reality of what we're facing here. Let's see what's going on here. Okay.
Being in a post-disaster time is very emotionally charged and very difficult, but I think that it's worthy work that we do as new urbanists. You know, we care about people and we care about places, and nowhere is it more important than here.
That's true.
Well,
Let's see. I'm gonna just
we'll wait for Garland. I was with Steve when we did the Mississippi Renewal Forum in 2005. I just wanted to say that was like one of the most significant things that I've ever done, and it was. I think it was the approach was far different, and I think that came about through a connection of a new urbanist planner, including Steve, with the governor of Mississippi, and that was put together fairly quickly. But it was it was all sort of a formal charrette, and um, the plans were these formal plans of like really how to possibly recreate these communities that were many of them were swept away. Um, and there was a tremendous, I think there was a tremendous effort and spirit of the people who all came, including many of the people who were affected, who lived in the communities at the time.
Yeah. Let's see. All right, folks can see my screen, right? I can see you guys. And so, I want to talk a little about why this work's important. We're currently on the ground in Swannanoa, which is out Asheville, about half an hour. And we're here assisting with post-disaster recovery efforts. Neighborhood hubs. I think what has been um, really a learning experience for all of us. We came in knowing that tactical neighborhood hubs blend principles of placemaking and tactical urbanism with traditional response efforts to immediately address the pressing mental health needs of adults and children affected by disasters. What we found in Swannanoa is many of the ingredients of what we would come in and pop up on Tabula Rasa are already here. People have already into a vacuum rushed community to fill the void. People needed to stand up at the campfire and hang out around the campfire and decompress after a long day. Actually, I believe the fire is a sacred fire that has been burning as long as they've had this occupation going. The children needed a place to play. So Into the Void, this play structure was built. People needed food. Into the Void, this food relief organization found a local partner in the local pretzel shop who was able to make his kitchen resources available to get people fed. So when Place Initiative came in here, what we're trying to do is figure out the gaps. Like, how can we help to grow this little budding community here in Swannanoa and support it, so that this immediate recovery, response, can be fed and can grow into a long-term recovery that actually does start to look like Build Back Better. Um, and it's really important right now for this what is acting as a hub, to provide an environment where people can connect and heal and begin to emotionally rebuild their lives and do something as simple as play structure and have some joy. This is the landscape of devastation. You walk 2 blocks from here and it doesn't look like a place that people could actively live. It looks like a place that people used to live, utterly demolished. And to have a little oasis of humanity where people have some joy in the middle of that is, I think, more powerful than words can convey. Here again is that free store. This is the community provided free store, but it's part of this network of disaster response that supplements the other centers that are being provided around the area by organizations like Red Cross, FEMA, and Salvation Army. It's not competing with those. It's providing something different, more of a community space, for survivors and volunteers, a community gathering, a place where social cohesion is honored as the essential ingredient, reinforcing the strong community bonds that significantly improve long-term outcomes. So, why is place place
Again, the Starlink seems to be cutting out a little bit.
help this place build back better, centered, equitable, sustainable, and resilient?
Can you give me one?
Oh shit! Well, that was a perfect. So
So
you guys
it's
freeze up.
right. Yeah, it's a little bit. We're hearing every other word, Garland.
And this Yeah. Do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Who knows? The satellites move or something. It's not entirely reliable. Um, but yeah, let me just repeat why I Place Initiative is here. It's to use this inflection point after disaster to help a place like Swannanoa, which is located right next to a Superfund site for a former chemical weapons factory and now has been devastated by flooding from hurricane. To help this place act better in a way that's community centered, equitable, sustainable, and resilient. I think that's why we're here. We have set up a GoFundMe. If you are the type of person who donates to charitable causes and you'd like to make a donation, you'd be able to scan this QR code or screenshot this and go to the URL to make a donation. Don't be shy. Feel free to share this with your friends and your community as well.
Thank you, Garland. I wanted to remind everybody to ask your questions in the Q&A function of Zoom. And we're going to get to those, relatively quickly. I'm going to have a little bit of a discussion with the panel and then get to Q&A. One thing I wanted to ask a little bit was, first of all, how did these efforts all come together? What brought Elsie and Garland? Ryan's already there in Asheville, and just started a new job actually before Helene came and hit. But what brought Elsie and Garland to Asheville and the Asheville region to begin with to help to plan for recovery?
I can speak to being the sort of center of all of, a lot of this this chaos, this chaotic idea that I know that this has been important. I've known it for a long time. And with every disaster, I work on this tactical neighborhood hub, the refining of it. And Steve Mouzon and I got really close at launching this after Hurricane Dorian hit the Bahamas because of his work in the Bahamas. But at the last moment, our connection there had difficulty with cancer. And so we didn't get to deploy, but we had a lot of the pieces already lined up. So when Helene hit, I used to teach on the Cherokee Indian Reservation here in Western North Carolina. I was the cultural and indigenous arts teacher back in 2001. And so I've lived in Silva, and I have friends up here like Joe Minicozy with Urban 3 and others. And so I wasn't planning on getting involved, but about 5 days in, I had some people reach out to me and ask if I would be able to, provide my federal policy expertise, assistance to some of these small communities. And I thought this was a good time to go ahead and try to mobilize since I knew that the destruction was so widespread. So I reached out to Garland, knowing that Place Initiative is very supportive of my work in place-based design in disaster recovery and thinking about climate change and the impacts on community. And Steve Mouzon has been a perpetual collaborator over the years in lending his knowledge to these sorts of things. And I've known Ryan for a number of years, and I had no idea that he was located here in Asheville, sitting in the middle of it for his very first disaster until someone let me know. And then I reached out to him, and it's just been it is a very organic mess of a process, we're Garland and Free and I are living out of this RV. And you can see that there's a water station behind us. There's a power cord running to the RV. The church is nice enough to let us be drawing power off of it. I mean, it's been very challenging. I cannot that is an understatement when I say challenging. We know going into it that things are going to be extremely difficult because it's not the right time and it's not the right place for placemakers, except it is the right time and it has to be the right place. And it's going in and being able to pop this up within the first week after the disaster would have made things a lot easier, because by the time you hit week 3, there's a lot of challenges of people starting like heavy debris removal and starting to get nervous about, people being in specific areas. And so a lot of the pop-up things that need to have to happen in those first couple of days. Ryan and Garland, do y'all want to chime in about how you got drug into all of this?
Well, I work locally, and I was really happy to see Elsie planning a trip here because I knew she had so much experience. And that's the thing when you're going through a disaster like this, there is a body of knowledge, there's procedures, there's timelines, there's resources. There's lots and lots of information that comes at you so fast. And every day, as Elsie mentioned, you're going through a different phase of what's needed. So while everyone might be gathering water and diapers one day, the next day all those are shutting down, and the conversation turns to temporary housing and near-term shelter. So I was very excited to get the experience of her and others who've been in this field and seen this again and again and again, and getting just incredible advice from them. I got to go on a full day tour with her of some of the hardest hit communities. And it was really, really emotionally devastating and taxing. As she said, I still feel tired a few weeks later from bearing the weight of people's stories, of the tension they felt, of the emotions, and the experiences that they lived through. So I'm very grateful that she has had those skills to navigate, find those places, find the hearts where every community organized these tactical hubs or resilience hubs, and then could sweet talk us into really being friends with the people on the ground, or the cop closing the road. She just had that perfect charm for what they wanted to, how they wanted to relate to a human. And it really, a lot systems break down and it becomes about the people and the humans. And I think it's great that Gardner came as well, or Garland, because the information that they have about how important these tactical hubs, these resilience hubs, these pop-up centers that emerge in this moment are, it cannot be overstated, because they are the seeds of regeneration. They're where human stories mingle and the best ideas come together and the needs get solved. And so I think it's really exciting that they're bringing in some maybe redeployable infrastructure that could be utilized. But it's also interesting to see what is needed and necessary, and what people need at different times. And so I think this is about being part of the learning body of climate disasters, which are happening in more places more often. And I think it really should be a topic of interest, because a lot of what happened here was known. Were known vulnerabilities, had been studied. There were plans to adapt to them, but they weren't prioritized enough, and they weren't well known widely. And so I think that this really makes these situations very real. I called back to my old hometown, Long Beach, California, and they said their climate resistance plans have mostly revolved around sea level rise. But after seeing the floods, they took a deeper look at the LA River Basin and realized that they have a higher risk from a 100-year flood devastating low-lying parts of the city sooner than sea level rise has their impact. So they weren't, the risk of it wasn't even really being looked at correctly.
If I could just jump in, one of the things that are radically different from what I experienced in the Mississippi Renewal Forum almost 20 years ago, and what I'm seeing now, is the tactical urbanism element. Everything took place in a ballroom when people were making plans and drawing, and nobody was like actually going out building anything, although they did do tours and saw all the sites. But it was really all about drawing, but the concept of tactical urbanism had not been really fleshed out at that point. And I wanted to talk about the tactical urbanism angle, and really what is a tactical hub? When you're talking about like a tactical hub that you're creating, what are the elements of that?
Sure. And then this plays into several of the questions that I've seen in the comments. So the tactical neighborhood hubs, the core components are the basis of what you've seen locals doing organically, which is just popping something up that creates a place where people can come and get things, like receive physical things. But like with a coffee shop, it's, yes, coffee is much needed and desperately appreciated. And also it creates a place where you can see people. It's really coming together around a place to be around people so that you can give hugs and cry and laugh and be a human being. And someone asked about the role of libraries. The libraries that are in centrally located to neighborhoods have, they immediately convert into amazing spaces. Ryan and I have seen firsthand here in Swannanoa the critical role that the library played in a community that had a traditional English layout, English village layout, and they were cut off from everything for 3 days in that neighborhood. But because the library, which was not just a library, but it had a beautiful outdoor space, a small soccer field, a small little stage that the kids used to show play, that they used to do plays. Um, it had a little tiny basketball court. All of that in the middle of the neighborhood meant that in the immediate aftermath of the disaster, when there is no electricity and there is no way to communicate with others because cell phone towers are down, and we see this with every disaster, if a neighborhood has a place to walk for people to go, it is the difference between life and death. Because as soon as people emerge from their homes and they walk to whatever is that center area, that is where they start organizing immediately to go and check on other people, to go and see what's happened, to start, they were trapped in the neighborhood, so they organized feeding, they set up a place for medical care. This is within hours. And we saw this same thing happen after the Alabama tornadoes, and we see it in every disaster. If they have a place that they can go immediately, then they do. The problem is when a place has sprawl, when it doesn't have a town center. Like Swannanoa did not have a town center, but the library served in one neighborhood for that. But in another neighborhood, there was nothing. So they've created that something. And I think that the hub needs a couple of components, which is a place, and it needs the right place in a community to counterbalance what Ryan said about where you pull in and start handing out water is usually in a strip mall. It's where it's easy to do, but it doesn't hold the heart of the community. That is going to always be a surface parking lot, and it's never going to feel like the middle of everything. And so finding those natural places where we can pop up and start handing out coffees or blankets or it is that's needed immediately. Nanostead started because they showed up there wanting to, in the immediate aftermath of the disaster, thinking they'd make some sandwiches. And then by, a few hours later, all of a sudden, like more friends show up and more friends show up and people want to do things, and who has chainsaws and how can we start mobilizing? And over days and a week, after a week, Nanostead looked like the most well-run volunteer response camp ever, that also did feeding and also had music and also had, stuff for kids to do. And so it's us as as urbanists and practitioners, it's important to recognize that our role is not just like in Katrina, where you wait for it to be the right time. But if you create places for people to come in the immediate aftermath of disaster, it allows them to organically talk about what they're going to do about their home, what they're going to do about their lost business, how they want their community to be rebuilding. They're talking about rebuilding in the minutes and hours. Like, how do I start digging out of the mud? What is happening now? So if you wait 6 months or a year to start to think about these things, there's already so much that's been repaired. And that goes to, a couple of other questions in the chat. I do want to honor that Marshall, North Carolina, 100%. Thank you, anonymous attendee, for posting that. Marshall, North Carolina has had a mermaid parade for a very long time. And that is part of where that narrative around mermaids has been expanded upon because of this awful event. So the mermaid parades will get bigger and more robust, I am sure, and take on a totally different meaning. The problem with our expertise coming in as outsiders is a challenging one. And that's why the appropriate thing is, if you are local to a disaster, in feeling like you have a role to play in the immediate response piece. That's really what I want the message to be, is if this happens to your community or where your family or friends live, you are capable of going in right at that time that Red Cross is going in to set up the table where their bottled waters are being handed out. Set it up in the right place where you know the heart of the neighborhood should be. And if over time that's where people are coming together, then that's going to end up being a beloved place for a very long time.
And I can
Garland,
just add a little, real quick, I could just add a little visual to that. So on the left there, that's the most important distribution site in Western North Carolina called Beloved. And you can see the experience of this site. You know, it's purely functional and utilitarian. It's doing the job every day, but it's not a place for people. And that's not necessarily what it's meant to be. But this is in one of the neighborhoods that we visited, a Latino community, and their resilience hub was in this gas station, and there was a huge military presence all in this area, and people were telling us they're very upset because they're traumatized, and there's people driving around in jeeps with guns. And it's re-traumatizing. It's deeply inhumane experience, and this is in a legacy neighborhood where on the right, this is a church distribution site in a parking lot. And it's somewhat organized, but also kind of disheveled. And then the garden had a beautiful community painted pantry that people could access and different resources there. So you can see that there's kind of a nuanced difference between the stuff I showed you earlier, where there was very intention to creating social infrastructure like seating, aesthetics, human food, comfort, and layering that in on top of just the utilitarian services that are bringing people to these sites. And so it's sort of different innovations seem to happen at different resilience hubs. One group, they created an entire app, and the whole thing was digitized, and you basically could shop your recovery in a way. Whereas others, another one, they had water distribution sites, but they didn't have the nozzles. And the guy at the tool library 3D printed nozzles so that the water could be distributed. So there's a lot of innovation and technology and connection that can add value to these sites and make them better, and also make them what we believe is that these sites have emerged at the rescue phase, but that those leaders and communities need to be resourced and connected and encouraged to become the long-term champions of recovery, which is a 10, 20-year process.
we're going to get to Q&A in a second. We have a bunch of questions, but I did want to ask, bring Garland in and ask a little bit about long-term thinking, because that's one thing that new urbanists do, is thinking in the long term. At the same time, you may be thinking in the very short term. And Place Initiative is really is looking at long-term resilience of communities. And so, how do you bring in the concept of long-term resilience and planning for walkability and placemaking in the long term while you're responding to like these immediate needs?
Very delicately. And I think there's also a question about maps and how do you strike the right balance between maps and boots on the ground. I don't know. But you do have to strike the right balance between maps and boots on the ground. It's a very, very delicate situation. People are still traumatized. And we know that when you are experiencing trauma, when you're experiencing PTSD, that one of the first things, the symptoms to show up is your executive decision-making function becomes compromised. And so that's a really challenging situation, because if you want to build back better, if you want to come in and make changes to the DNA of the built environment or to the social fabric, this is a great inflection point. It's a great time. Let's build back different than it was. But people just instinctively, they don't want to be making decisions about how to make it better. Like, they kind of just want their house back. They kind of just want stuff to be put back and be made functional as soon as possible. And so, like, that's the real challenge. I think that's almost the hard problem of this moment, is how to navigate trauma and PTSD with this desire to do some decision making, to engage in executive function thinking, and to about how to build back better. I would love to hear advice on how we navigate that particular part of the landscape, because to me that sounds like the most challenging part right now.
It's
Let me
definitely
get to
very clear. Oh, sorry. Well, it's
I
definitely
wanted to
very
get to
clear that uh, the status quo creeps back in so fast. The Swannanoa Library was this amazing resilience hub. It had a restoration station. It inspired us so much. But the second it got cold, people stopped coming to the site, and so their need changed to, we need heating. We have to go back to work, and so we would need staffing. And so without those elements becoming apparent and added right at that moment, you have the chance of regression. And people already wanting to pull building permits in the floodplain, whereas a lot of people in the community having a broader moment of reflection about high slope development and floodplain development. And there isn't a natural way that those different desires get articulated, get mediated. And so, our role, hopefully, is we're working with another group, Mountain True, and Chris, formerly of the Asheville Design Center, who did a lot of the charrettes to bring together some of the development in the River Arts District, to reevaluate this and provide a more balanced voice about if public dollars, for example, will be utilized in the rebuilding of these sensitive areas, how we go about that and learn more widely.
We really got to get to Q&A because time is getting away from us. But the first question we got was, can you talk about the rush to get up and working with no ability to think about doing it better, which you talked about, Garland. The roadways, stream banks, is everything going to have to be built twice because you're making these immediate decisions? And not necessarily doing everything, taking all the time to think about how to do it best for the long term.
Yeah, I'll speak to that because that involves money, and that's where the federal policy piece comes into play. So the building back twice is not a viable option, unfortunately. The hack of it that all of the roads and bridges here are owned by the state. And the state is very efficient at doing what the taxpayers want in fixing things quickly. And they are working very hard to get roads and bridges fixed. If they would do something what FEMA calls a temporary repair, what that means is that they can get it repaired back to the minimum functionality for life, health, and human safety and to protect public improved property. That allows them to put a pin holder and take more time to decide how they want to put it back permanently. But if a state or local jurisdiction in other places that owns that type of infrastructure doesn't know not to fix it back all the way, once it's fixed back, then FEMA considers that repair complete, and there's no opportunity to talk about rebuilding it more resiliently. So like the river has moved. Does that bridge need to move? Does it need to be widened? Does the bridge, should it have a pedestrian or bike path put in on it? Not just in addition to the resilience of making it stronger to the floodwaters, but also the community wanted other things with it. So we're trying to get information to the state level to let them know that if they don't already plan on doing just a temporary repair, how they could do that to leverage hazard mitigation money up front. Because once you expend the money and your repair is done, that door closes financially. And that's going to be the major thing that keeps people from us from getting better things. And it's that knee jerk to like get it back and get it done fast that really harms us in many ways. And so that temporary repair is that lifeline to hold on to when it comes to the federal dollars.
And Richard Hoy talks about, please talk about the need for daily routines, particularly for children in these tactical neighborhood hubs, which brings up the concept of programming. Do you do programming as well as, building in these neighborhood hubs?
Absolutely, there needs to be programming, and that is something that comes over time and that becomes more difficult over time because in the immediate aftermath of the disaster, you have lots of volunteers the first 3 weeks. And as Ryan mentioned, the reason one of the biggest reasons Cold is a big part of it, but lack of volunteers to staff a playground. Like right now, we've got some people in at the playground sometimes, but not all the time. And so having a steady line of volunteers that can manage these types of resources it's hard to do with volunteers because you never know if people are going to show up or not show up. Consistency is difficult. The kids just went back to school last week here in Swannanoa. It's different for each community because there is no water and how to get water in for kids and what we do because there's no, fire sprinklers. Like, how do you deal with that? Schools regularly become one of the big problems that we see post disasters is that schools become shelters. And that is difficult to evict people out of the shelter when you need to get those.
Okay, Elsie froze up there.
Just to hammer home that point, systematically, if community sites had these partnerships with community, so the libraries, the community centers, the schools, they all have to shut down immediately during these events. But the ones that had special relationships with community, where community was able to commandeer them, reopen the library and run it on a volunteer basis, or the community center run it on a volunteer basis, we saw those sites become very successful. And that's something that definitely should be looked at. Now, we had a water crisis where we did not have any water coming in, and the schools and hospitals started digging wells. And so this is how strong and resilient these sites are and could be. And it really is something that needs to be looked at more and promoted more, these type of partnerships, because they really created a platform for success.
People are asking, how can they volunteer? If they're local, if they can get there, do you need help? And can people show up and volunteer?
The best thing I think for the CNU community to do is to write in what your abilities are and what your offer is, because people locally are being overwhelmed by offers for help, but they're not triaged and specific. We heard one of the leaders of the River Arts District, which was hit absolutely the hardest in the city of Asheville. He had a heart episode because of all of the attention and energy. So, reach out to mediating organizations, LC, Thrive Asheville, Mountain True, who are helping marshal in support so we can connect you with the right conversation, and your abilities and unique talents can get connected in at the right time with the right process. That would be very, very helpful for this community.
I'd like to say that we're looking at, so if people email me one and I can just store their information for when we get a resource set up, but we're looking at working with an entity that can bank all of your desire to have your expertise donated. So if you want to donate 10 hours of architectural time, or 20 hours worth of engineering time, or site planning time, or electrical or structural, any of your professional expertise, we're working with an organization now to set up a way to bank those hours so that the jurisdictions can get access and individuals can get access to them later when they're appropriate. So we're working to set that up with a woman that has that capability. But if you want to email me, I can, if you want to reach out to Thrive Asheville, CNU, I'm sure that we can set up through Place Initiative and Place Initiative's website a form for you to be able to say that you want to be kept in touch with or apprised of what's going on, that we can tap into you. And then my email address is lc@forceofnature.biz, B-I-Z.
If you could put that into the chat, that would be great. We are now at the 1 minute mark, and we have plenty other questions. And if I wanted to say that we will post this video on the CNU's website within a day, and so folks can go back and watch this. If any of you have time to continue to answer questions, we can keep trying to go through the Q&A. We had a very good question from Jane Francis. Talk about striking a balance between honoring the local knowledge of the place and the people who live there with the expertise of having worked in other disasters in other places? How do you strike that balance?
That's a great question, and it's the most important one, because what's interesting about disasters like this is there's so much talent in your community that is not well known, not visibilized, not tapped. And those people, make themselves more known in these situations, and they become more relevant, and they're going to be there for the long term. So the best thing, I think, is to put them in the driver's seat. So instead of coming with solutions and we're here to help you, which is the worst thing that they want to hear, it's about first connecting with them emotionally, talking with them, and then learning about or talking about ideas, which a really great way is to talk about other disasters and what other people have experienced and what they know is coming. Because when we went, for example, to Swannanoa Library, they were very happy with what they had done so far, but they weren't really thinking about the next and the next step. And they didn't realize that those conversations had started. And so when they heard that from LC, they got very interested, and they wanted more resources, and they wanted to talk to more people, and they're showing up. And so they're empowered, and they're in the driver's seat, and they're being resourced and supported, not told what to do or expertised or anything like that.
We did have a question about the experience of residents in a disaster zone, and whether there is a different experience for people who live in walkable neighborhoods compared to auto-oriented parts of the community, and what you see with that regard.
It's okay. We know where we are. Appreciate you. Yeah, it's sorry, I'm on a webinar. We know that it literally is life or death. If the communities that have a downtown, that have a neighborhood center, those fare far better in the immediate aftermath when there is no infrastructure left for communication. That is where we rely on our lizard brain animal instinct. We crawl out from underneath debris and rubble. We naturally gravitate to where we know others will be, where we can find help. And the places that lack that are not just worse off in the immediate aftermath of a disaster, but that stays with them. The longer they are without a place to convene and come together to hold fast that social fabric, the more the distance grows over the days and weeks and months, they get further and further and further behind on their disaster. And the ones that have that place to bring social cohesion together, they are not only faster off out of the gate with the chainsaws, but they are inevitably faster when it comes to there are already conversations on week 4. Marshall is a year ahead. Marshall has already, because of the mobilization in place that Nanostead served as, and the way that they organized everyone so effectively, Marshall has already mucked out most of the downtown buildings, where all the buildings were the first and a portion of the second floor were completely submerged in water. All the historic buildings were at the bottom of the river, and they've already mostly mucked out. They're doing sanitation. They're working to get some of these buildings back open by the end of the year. What they need is access to capital. If anyone knows any resources available for active capital units for $500, $1,000, $500,000 plug-in is difficult for small businesses, but the social capital has made the lack of be possible because we rely on each other to just jump in and do what we can when we're impacted.
I think one of the most exemplary stories we heard was the Swannanoa Library. That town, that area was designed in like an English village. And they said that, when the disaster happened, everyone like ants just filed to the center. And that was so interesting, because we went to other places where the center that was there because it was a strode and there was no obvious hierarchy of place, was the back of a giant warehouse. And that was the center of the community, because that just happened to be the distribution hub. in the back of a parking lot, in the back of a warehouse, with no sense of place, with no desire for people to stick around and have those casual chats and run into a neighbor. And you could clearly see that the disadvantage of situations like that versus having the good urbanism that created not only the obvious sort of idea of where to go, but also to want to stay there.
We had a question concerning house plans and housing. Dean Gunderson asked about conversations that have been had with the Liberty House plans regarding permanent post-disaster reconstruction efforts and streamlining rebuilding housing. I'm thinking back to the Mississippi Renewal Forum. A major thing that came out of that was the Katrina Cottage idea of how to do housing that was better than the FEMA trailer. Have you had discussions about housing, and where does that fit in?
I can say from an outside of Asheville perspective that housing obviously is front center. Emergency housing is a big thing. The saddest part about the Katrina.
Okay, Elsie is frozen a little bit. Do you want to take over?
Just add to where we're at with housing, it's a really interesting discussion. We were gathering. Oh, go ahead, Elsie. You're back, I think.
So the Liberty House plans. That's any architects that are willing to donate their fees for those. That's where we are looking to work with on pre-reviewing and pre-adopting some house plans that can be fast on the permitting process to help with rebuilding. And again, I feel like
I'm kind of frozen.
So some of the recent conversations, obviously, there is a lot of energy around tiny houses, modular houses. A lot of people are contacting with these type of ideas. But locally, it's been interesting because there's a lot of ordinances that need to be rapidly changed. So, for example, there's 5,000 or 6,000 Airbnbs in the area because this is a huge tourist destination. And they can rent those Airbnbs longer term, short term, but it's up to 18 months through FEMA. But local ordinances then would penalize those owners from making them Airbnbs again. So they're having to change that ordinance. A small town called Brevard has been super innovative, changed about RV allowances, and there's a lot of talk about RVs coming in. They prefer to put housing on properties that already can accommodate them, but they're also talking about setting up RV villages and tiny house villages. So that conversation has been evolving. We hosted a conversation of nonprofits where the idea to mobilize unused CDBG, community development block grant funds, to go to housing repair work was come up with. And then a tighter housing group advocated that to the city, and about $4 million was moved into business stabilization and making money available for housing repairs through groups like Habitat for Humanity. So there's so many things happening in that area, but it's a huge challenge because even before this, housing was a big problem in the area, and now it's definitely exacerbated.
On a similar topic, Justin Wallace asked about people whose homes were destroyed and they can't rebuild, or it may take months or years for them to rebuild. What happens to them? Are they relocated? Do they move in with family members? Do they become homeless? What's going on?
There's a lot of matchmaking services, so it's everything from being connected to family members to being placed in hotels. For example, displaced workers for the county are being put in hotels. Places like we heard Trader Joe's employees, Trader Joe's got an Airbnb where multiple employees could come and shower and do laundry at in an adjacent town that didn't lose those services. So it's kind of every stitch and nook and cranny that can be found is being utilized.
I wanted to give a shout out to Chris Joyelle that just posted that idea for that banking that came out of a meeting that I had with him and some of his other colleagues. So that's in the webinar chat. He's listed his email address. That's a here for him. He's saying if there's any architects or other people related to the built environment that want to donate services, he is absolutely a good one to be aggregating some of that stuff for the outside of Asheville needs. Would there be a way for us to email? I don't know how best to like stay in touch with all of the people that have chimed in through the chat. How does that usually
Yes,
work, Rob?
there is definitely there. I mean, there is a way to get the email of the people who participated in this, and you know, possibly to figure out, you know, to correlate that with the chat, but at least all the emails of the people who participated in the event, and that you can get back in touch with them.
Yeah, and then again, we'll try to set something up on Place Initiative's website for a form where you can put in your information if you want to be a resource towards these things as time evolves over the next few weeks and months and years.
Okay. Well, maybe one more question, and then you guys can get back to the important work that you're doing on the ground. But yeah, Richard asks, can you expand on the phases that can be identified in disaster recovery in order to have resources and expectations aligned with future disasters? I guess the long-term resilience question.
Well, the first is
think,
response. Go ahead, Ryan. You hit it first, and then I'll go.
Okay. Well, almost everyone we talk to has different sort of way of carving it up, but one that we've heard from, I think, FEMA is rescue, rescue, response, rebuild, and renaissance. And in the housing community today, they said we were in muck and something else. So I think like there's lots of different frameworks of carving it up, but go ahead, Elsie.
You know, the message that I really wanted to get out to this is less about being an outsider going in and more about knowing that if you are impacted or people that you love or that you know are impacted, for communities that you are connected to in some way, that there is a role for you as a first responder, that you can be a first place-based responder, and that is just as important, if not more important. We are not, this has never been done. We've never deployed at the very front lines, but I believe that Place Initiative, you know, and place-based design being part of that first responder voluntary organizations active in a disaster is really critical to just start thinking in our own minds of understanding that we do have a role and that us popping things up tactically is appropriate, because that is in every disaster. It doesn't matter if there was an ice storm in Alabama and people had to like got trapped in their cars and people opened up their homes and like went out onto their porches and started handing out cocoa. You'll notice I said went onto their porches. So like these things matter that we do, and they matter not just in the everyday beautiful day, but they especially matter in a bad day. And I really just wanted the thinking to be like, we do have a role as first responders. That's important for our thinking as these things happen to places we love, that we can contribute and know that you have a network of other people that will descend and support what your needs are.
I think that's a great way to end it, and folks can get in touch with all the people on this panel. I think that you can look at Thrive Asheville website and get in touch with Ryan, and LLC gave her email address earlier, but Force of Nature is Solutions is her organization, and get in touch with Garland. at Place Initiative. And, if you have ideas on how to be a responder, a place-based responder, you can get in touch with these folks. And I'm sure there's lots of time. The recovery is going to be going on for, as they said, for years, and there's room for people to help if they want to help. And I wanted to thank this panel very much for the work that they're doing and for contributing to this discussion, and everybody who participated in this as well. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thanks. Good to see you all.
Thank you so
okay.
much.
Yeah. Thanks all.